back, everybody, to another episode of Divine Data. Today, I am sat with the beautiful Miss Laura Dawn. She is a microdosing mentor, the host of the Psychedelic Leadership Podcast, an author, a teacher, a leader, so many different things. How are you doing today, Miss Laura Dawn?
I am doing wonderful. Thanks for asking, and thank you so much for having me on your show, Samantha. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be sat in this internet world with you. After having met you in person, I know that like you are such an incredible, authentic, true leader in this world, and you're here to really make waves. You've already made waves, and I'm really excited to continue seeing you do so. I'm excited to continue listening to your podcasts, and just watching you flourish helps me flourish and helps the world flourish. So it's a really exciting journey that you're on and that you're, helping other people crusade through as well. So do you want to explain to people a little bit about how you got into the world of psychedelics?
Oh gosh, well, we'd have to go back a couple of decades at this point. I had my first high dose psilocybin experience when I was about 14 or 15 years old, and it really opened up a lot for me in terms of shifting my perceptual view of reality. And even though things were so different then, and, when we're working with psychedelics without really setting intentions or understanding what we know now about set and setting, there's still, in my mind, a place for recreational use and the potential for recreational use to really catalyze change. And so I like to say that psychedelics hand raised me and forged me into the woman that I am today. And it's been amazing actually to watch the way the psychedelic movement has grown and evolved and changed, and how much research is coming out about psychedelics today. So it's really just such an amazing time to be in this field because it's so emergent. So all the people who feel in it are just contributing in real time to the shaping of it, to really creating best practices, content, ways to support people. So I've really grown up with psychedelics for the past couple of decades, and I'm really just so grateful to be a part of this movement in the way that I am.
Yeah, I think that it's really important for people to recognize that, like, while there is this like deeply medicinal side of it, that like even in the recreational side, there are opportunities for that transformation and healing. But to be able to have that awareness and education around it is super integral as well. A lot of us do get to come into this space by just experiencing it on our own. However, it's super important that you're doing the work that you're doing with the mentorship that you're offering to people as well, because there's a lot of, misinformation out there.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of people who also go too far into the psychedelics world and they don't find that tether, the proper balance. So
Mhm.
I'm curious as to like hear a little bit about like how you decided and when you decided to start this microdosing membership, and how all of it came about. Because I know that we shared on the Thank You Plant Medicine page about even ayahuasca microdosing. So I want to get into that at some point too, to talk about
Mhm.
that and understand there's opportunities with that as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just in terms of my own experience with microdosing, I started intuitively microdosing about 15 years ago before people even were calling it microdosing. Like I didn't, I had, I mean, it was such a different time. There was not really like information the way that there is now and everyone talking about it. So it was an intuitive practice, and I struggled with depression in my earlier years, and I found that working with just small nibbles of psilocybin was actually really helping with my mood. I also used to engage with cannabis. I don't anymore, but when I was in high school, I found that going into somewhat of an altered state allowed me to focus in school and allowed me to enjoy the process more fully. I actually was never a huge fan of like institutionalized education. So at a certain point in high school, I actually stopped going and I got a tutor to be able to have 1 hour of like mentoring a week just replaced all of my classes. So I had a lot of free time on my hands. And I I was also an athlete growing up, and I was also very keen on exploring the unknown. I was like the type of kid who was just like, oh, everyone's going left, I'm going to go right. Like, how much can I hurl myself off the deep end, and what is there? And when I had that first high dose psilocybin experience, and I was out in nature and I looked up at the sky, and I was just like so in awe of what this reality is. And I had a lot of influence in my life in terms of an older brother who was very into Buddhism and Eastern philosophy. And so I started really at a young age, like crafting my own reality. And I'm so grateful to my mother, who she used to always tell me, I trust you. I trust your decisions. You have a good head on your shoulders. And so, there would be moments where she would see me, at the mall while I was supposed to be in class. And she would just be like, hey, how's it going? What are you up to? And I really appreciated that. It really shaped who I was and who I am today. And yeah. And so I was really just curious to see the way that like little amounts of psilocybin affected my mood, especially after going through like quite a number of high dose experiences. And I really enjoyed it. And then about 10 years ago, I sat with ayahuasca for the first time. So psilocybin was like really my primary plant teacher for over a decade. I also dove very deep into LSD after I graduated university. I packed my bag, I gave away everything that I owned, and I left my hometown of Montreal, and I never went back. And I ended up just going on such a deep adventure. After school, I had kind of hit a sort of rock bottom moment in my life, like an identity crisis where I knew I didn't want to be on the conventional path that I was sort of on at that point. And so I also went really deep with LSD and had a lot of very transformational experiences with that medicine that I have a lot of respect for. And then I met ayahuasca for the first time and bowed at her altar. And the first sit, I just knew that she was going to be my plant teacher for the rest of my life. And then there's some details that I need to omit for my own like safety and privacy, but I was really grateful to be able to learn from some teachers around cultivating these plants. And I won't mention, where or when and all of those things, but I learned how to make tea. And it was really a very special initiation. And so over the years, and just to say, actually, Banisteriopsis caapi, which is the ayahuasca vine, is legal in the U.S. It's legal to grow these plants and to make vine tea. And it's legal as long as the chacruna is not in it, which is the DMT, and that's what makes ayahuasca brew. Okay, but just in terms of the legalities, and we have to be careful, when we're talking publicly about illegal substances and all of these things. So I started microdosing with just the Banisteriopsis caapi with the vine, and I started learning. And the more I would talk to different elders from different indigenous traditions, and at the World Ayahuasca Conference last summer, I heard different elders speak about how Banisteriopsis caapi, ayahuasca vine, is the primary plant medicine. It's a powerful teacher in its own right. And yes, there are additional benefits when DMT is combined, but ayahuasca on its own has many healing compounds in it, including beta carbolines. And these are natural antidepressants, actually. And I actually just interviewed Dennis McKenna. That episode is coming out tomorrow, where he talks about the pharmacology of ayahuasca and how it works as a natural antidepressant. So over the past 10 years, I've really been cultivating a framework, a practice around working with different microdosing substances, specifically for opening the creative channel, for tapping into flow states, for creating a foundation from which we can build upon that allows us to live our best lives, to create not from when I talk about flow, it's more like, tapping into this place of connecting to spirit. And so creating from this place that's not really from us, but from something higher than us, and how to live in a healthy way. And microdosing can really help us shake up um, stuck patterns and habits. And so really combining microdosing and the research around psychedelics with other fields and disciplines, like understanding how do we change habits and how can we think outside the box. And that's actually what I'm studying right now. I'm back in graduate school getting a degree in creativity studies and change leadership because creativity is one of the most important skill sets we need to develop for the 21st century. And there's a whole narrative, and I'd love to dive into that if you're open to going down that path. But over the past 10 years, I've really just been cultivating a framework that I think is really unique around how we can work with psychedelics, considering what we know about the research that's coming out in terms of neuroplasticity, neurogenesis. So how can we work with microdosing while understanding thought patterns, behavioral patterns, creating a foundation, a morning practice. And that's a big part of the work that I do is teaching people, how to incorporate meditation practices to change brainwave states, to tap into flow, to be able to create our best lives. So that's sort of in a nutshell, that framework that I teach that also does really incorporate uh, Eastern philosophy and quantum mechanics as well. I don't claim to know much about quantum mechanics, but I'm really fascinated about the overlap between psychedelic realms, altered states of consciousness, and what we call the quantum realm or the spirit realm. And so, yeah, weaving a lot of different modalities, positive psychology, behavioral therapy, somatics, all of these things, mindset, understanding the way that our minds work and understanding ourselves better and using or working with plant allies to help us get unstuck, find new patterns, think differently, be more creative, all of these things.
Totally. That's so beautiful. And I love everything you have to say there. I want to go back a little bit just to the point of, yes, like a lot of the stuff that we have spoken of, illegal substances. And yes, we want to keep our audience understanding what is legal where, and, acquiring certain parts of this stuff is illegal. Right. But some of it is legal in the United States, and it is possible to do. And I look forward to a day, and I think we're moving towards that, where we don't have to be as careful and we can share this information openly, and it's not being stifled anymore. But it is also, I think, the importance of understanding the people that do have sometimes taken it too far. And that's why I think some of it is illegal. There's also an understanding that potentially these things are illegal because of how mind opening they are and how much free thinking they do bring about. I don't want to go too deep into that. I do want to go back to what you were saying. And yes, it's an avenue I definitely would want to go down, to hear all about what you're studying right now. It sounds exactly like it's in line with what this podcast, was channeled through me for, is for authentic leadership, is change leadership, is to, bring what our authentic truth is to the table and have us embody it and speak it and share it, and then encourage other people to do the same and to bring that out in themselves. And, I think that for me personally, and I loved hearing earlier, you said that you had stopped working with cannabis. I am now 70 days clean from cannabis myself, because I had my time with her and then I started to abuse her, to be completely honest. Like, I didn't recognize that. And because I work in this field as well, a very small part of what I do is working with, thank you plant medicine. It's a huge thing, but it's not my biggest soul's purpose. However, I find it really important to still be connected to it in some ways, and connected to those that are in the field, because it is such an integral part of like evolution for those who can handle it, for those who perhaps don't have certain psychological predispositions.
Yeah. I think that's actually really important to emphasize, is that psychedelics are not for everyone. And and there's actually like a couple of things I would love to say about what you just said. The decriminalized movement is happening. And so depending on what state people are in, there is decriminalization now in Oregon, just passed a huge bill that was a huge landmark. This is like monumental in the psychedelic movement. The Minister of Health Canada just allowed therapists, psychologists, social workers to legally administer psilocybin for people in need. So the movement is happening. You just have to be aware and educated about, in terms of where you're at, and always, procure substances from someone that you know and trust. And if you're working with LSD, there's $20 testing kits. So it's always good to know what you're working with. Something I also really want to express that's really important to know is that, because I did mention it, so there's so much more sort of heat around the conversation with ayahuasca, in terms of cultural appropriation. And so I do work with people with a range of substances. I think it's really important to know that just because Banisteriopsis caapi is legal in the US, it doesn't mean that that's for everyone. So when I work with people, I actually do a very comprehensive intake form, medical intake form, and I have medical doctors that I consult with, and I do not recommend that people just start microdosing ayahuasca vine by any means, any stretch of the imagination. I only worked with people who already have a relationship with that plant, or who are ready to work with that plant from, based on what their intentions are and their needs are. That being said, recently, I don't know if you saw that, Samantha, but a few months ago, I put out one of my microdosing offerings that included Banisteriopsis online. And I was really harshly attacked by a group of people who were, quote unquote, social justice warriors. And I did receive so much support from people who are like, I love this, that you're doing this work. And so it's easy to sort of really focus on all the negative feedback that comes in. But there were a lot of people that were really upset and saying that, by me working with people with ayahuasca vine, well, first of all, how dare you? You're a white woman. You have no right to do this. This is indigenous medicine. I had people saying, a select small group subset of people saying, you're directly harming indigenous cultures by working with this medicine. And I understand that perspective. And I think, I welcome open discussion. And what happens on social media with people just hurling shit at each other, I don't think is the way forward, So I welcome conversations. I really take what people say to heart. And during that time, I really tuned in with like a number of different elders and teachers who I really respect in my life. And, it was so interesting to hear everyone say the same thing, which was trust your heart. In this world where there's so much polarity and so much division, the only thing you can do is really trust your heart. And I grow these plants. I grow ayahuasca vine, and it's legal to grow, and I make that medicine myself, and I do give back to indigenous cultures, and I do raise awareness around sustainability, and we grow in a sustainable way. And so I just want to mention that. And I don't just work with anyone. I do very thorough intake forms, and because there are a lot of contraindications. And you know what? Right now, people can go online and order Banisteriopsis caapi, and people are selling it without any disclaimers, without any information about, hey, you don't want to combine this medication or this supplement or this food even. And so when I work with people, I really provide like comprehensive videos that I've created, and it's all about creating sacred containers, sacred ritual, connecting back to who we really are. And I'll only work with people who have that intention, that if we can work with these plants, that I don't believe anyone owns any plant. And I honor and respect all the so many wide varieties of traditions that have worked with these sacred plant medicines. And I also feel like we do live in a new time now. And so how do we adapt, and how do we, move forward?
Yeah, I experience similar. I don't really talk about ayahuasca myself, but I experience similar feedback, if you will, from the social justice warriors who are out there, I think, with good intentions.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Like, they want to help protect culture. But at the same time, there is a lot of their own trauma through when they are attacking people and hurling the shit, as you said, because there is a lot of shit hurling that goes on in
Hmm.
social media. Unfortunately, it is a place where like we put stuff out there publicly, and we're going to the feedback that we're going to receive. And we are moving into a time where people are going to have to understand we're moving into a more cohesive, creative, connective time rather than the polarization that we've experienced for so long. But we're dealing with like the excavation of all debris that which society has thrown on us for so long, with all of the division and all the divisive nature and tactics that go in our world, even behind the scenes, and we don't even realize it, you know. And the thing is that we're really privileged, you and I, to have been able to travel the world and to be able to meet these people from these different cultures who are more than to have their culture shared. And especially when you said, you know, I don't believe anyone owns a plant. I don't believe anyone owns a plant either, you know. And there's a lot being said out there, and it is controversial, and it is unfortunately tough for us white women to say any of this stuff without getting backlash. And I really do truly believe and resonate with the follow your heart. Like if you're doing this with the right intention and you have the understanding of like oneness and real unity consciousness, like none of it was meant to only be one person's culture. And that's tough. That's really tough to say and hear for a lot of people as well. And to have that luck, like I said, to be able to travel the world and that impetus, that desire, that drive, because to be completely honest, I know people who have had $50 to their name and have made it to more countries than I've ever been to. You know, it's really just about your own self-limiting beliefs that are going to keep you where you are and keep you in the box that you decide to put yourself in. And this is to the people who might be listening who might get aggravated or triggered by what we're saying. And that's absolutely fine. That's that, like you said, I'm open to the conversation as well. I'm not as open to having had shit thrown at me. That's not as desirable. However, I also am perceiving and seeing it from a place of they're in their own trauma, and they're also being programmed right now by this divisive nature that's out there from society, from the media, from the government, wherever it may be really deriving from, that is sort of like allowing them, giving them the green light to attack people for things that they may not even quite understand. And I think that there are people in these cultures as well that come from those cultures who feel really negative feelings towards especially a white person. And that's, you know, I don't personally carry that white guilt, as it's said, because I don't come from a family that's, you know, I don't come from a slave owning family. Like I don't come from a history of people who have been divisive and have used the fact that they have white skin against anyone else. You know, I've never seen it that way. I've been so lucky to just like have multicultural friends and family and a lifestyle my entire life that has always opened my eyes and allowed me to bring everyone and everything into my heart. But yeah, I think it is really important to let people know that we recognize that, we see that part, let people know that it's not for everybody, like you said, like that's super important. You know, my former fiance completely went down the rabbit hole and lost his mind psychologically because he wasn't bringing the awareness of like his family history with certain types of psychoses and psychological disorders. So he loved the mind opening aspects of things like LSD and ketamine, and just lost himself to substances. And that's what's super important. And for me, when I stepped away from cannabis myself, I realized that I wasn't necessarily going down the right road. So I needed to step away from it so that I could still properly represent the destigmatization of plant medicine and psychedelics in that movement, because you know, I wouldn't be a good representative whatsoever of a company like Thank You Plant Medicine, or I wouldn't be the right person to be having this conversation with you if I didn't have that respect and that understanding that like these are sacred medicines. I also believe them to be gateways and doorways to show us something, but they're not the answer, the only answer. And like you were saying, you know, incorporating meditation and many other things. And I really want to hear more from you and what you're learning and how you've developed this new practice of yours and this understanding of yours.
Oh, well, there's so much that you just said that I could speak on. And before maybe I touch on the practices, I'd love to just sort of like um wrap up the whole, stepping out and being in a controversial space by saying that, leadership today is not for the faint of heart. And I think it's all of our responsibility to choose how we hold what we're embodying, and to choose how we hold our message, and to know how to have discernment between what's mine and what's not mine, and really encouraging everyone, whether you're in a leadership position or not, to choose kindness in the way that you communicate. Research now shows that it's so easy to be more polarized and divided over reading messages like text or, over social media. But when you actually have a conversation with someone and hear their voice, that it actually really shifts the dynamic. And I think it's really good to know that, some of the people that were sort of quote unquote attacking me on social media, when I reached out and had a conversation with them, it was actually like, hey, I actually really agree. We have a lot of the same underlying intentions and a lot of the same values, in terms of, what we want to see happen in terms of reciprocity and, the healing of this dysfunctional system that we live in. It's hard to find solutions built on top of very broken systems. So I think just like bringing that into our field of awareness is really helpful. Um, yeah. So just saying that, I just encourage anyone who does feel triggered by anything either of us are saying to reach out, and if you do reach out and want to initiate a conversation, I'm totally open to that. And at the end of the day, I still have to listen to my own heart and have that discernment between like what's mine and what's not mine to carry here. Because I think, especially in the psychedelic space, it's really a good thing that we hold each other accountable in a way that's like, hey, let's lift each other up. I see a sister over there. I wonder like if that's the best way to go about it. I'm going to reach out and have a conversation and be like, "Hey, where are you coming from on this? I'd love to understand, where you're coming from." And I think that that's just a good way that we can step into new paradigms of how we relate to each other. And so I just wanted to sort of wrap up that conversation by saying that. And in terms of the practices, would you like me to share some of like my morning flow routine? I mean, I've been developing my practices for many many years now. I've been a long term meditator, and there's lots of different styles of meditation, and I really resonate with one particular style so much, and I find it really helps to drop into the void, into those sort of altered states of consciousness. And also to your point, what you said about your ex-fiance, so much is integration. So all of these practices are really the foundation for integration. I also personally view microdosing as a powerful integration tool. And all of these, psychedelics are just one tool in our tool belt amongst so many, and just keeping that in mind, and also keeping in mind that everything can be a method of distraction. We can go into psychedelic journeys because we want to escape, or we can go because we want to really heal past trauma, or because we want to, clear some energetic channels that have been stuck, or, there's a lot of different intentions, but I think it's easy. And I've heard one of my spiritual teachers, Pema Chodron, say this, that, some people meditate for 20 years only to realize that they've just been escaping rather than making direct contact with reality, rather than, showing up to touch reality in a way, as opposed to, I'm going to get on the cushion to escape. And so I think also having that in our field of awareness when we're talking about all these different tools, all these different ways, underlying intention is so important. Integration really is the new ceremony. And so that's how I frame a lot of the work that I do in terms of the practices. And so much of what I do, and maybe I'll just say that I know it's pointing out the obvious, but we live in a radically different world than humanity has lived in ever before. Things are changing exponentially. People call this a VUCA world. I don't know if you've heard this. VUCA: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And this is the reality that things are changing so fast. We're overloaded with information. It's it's a new way that we have to show up, and we're not told like, hey, okay, this is actually drastically different than humans were biologically designed for. Okay, so we're having to like navigate through so much a very radically different terrain. And so when we look at what the skill sets are for us in our lives now, flexibility is key. Adaptability, resilience, creative thinking, thinking outside the box. So all of these things are really important to cultivate. And so when we look at how do we learn more quickly? How do we become more productive? And I use that word productive in a very different way than traditionally. You know, I'm not talking about like how do I do more, but how do I create more in alignment and on purpose? And how do I think more creatively? So, you know, when we look at these sort of core skill sets slash mindsets that are really the heart of how we can like up level our lives and really be at the forefront of taking this like evolutionary leap in consciousness, and we look at those core skill sets like adaptability, flexibility, resilience, creative problem solving, and we look at, okay, well, how do we really achieve that? How do we help support that? How can I start shifting my perceptual view of reality, which is, I think, what these times are really calling of us to do. You know, that we need to like really break from the past, because we're at that cusp. We're you know, for the cliche word, we're transitioning paradigms right now. And so when I look at like, okay, how do we achieve that and support all of those things like flexibility, adaptability, like roll with the punches, you know, how do we become more stronger, more resilient mentally, emotionally, physically? We can look at the research behind microdosing or psychedelic science and combine that with flow states, because when we tap into flow, research now shows there that we learn more quickly, that we open up that reduction valve, and we're processing a lot more information more rapidly and more efficiently. We're able to make more far-flung connections. We're able to shake up those deeply entrenched patterns that keep us stuck, behavioral patterns. And so when we look under the hood of flow states and psychedelic research that shows what's happening with altered states of consciousness, there's actually a lot of overlap there. And so I give presentations on this where I explain it with more like visuals, so it's a little easier to grasp and understand. But when we look at that, you know, the inputs that help us achieve these skill sets that are really essential for living and thriving in the 21st century, that we can actually really support that. Like when we look under the hood of you know, the neurochemistry of flow states, for example, and we see the way that the brainwave states change, that the prefrontal cortex goes offline, that the neurochemistry of what happens in our brain when we tap into flow, and we experience, you know, just such an open channel and such a direct connection to something so much bigger than us. And we look under the hood of what psychedelics do to the mind, they support that state. And then how else we support that state is by other practices. By understanding the flow cycle, we can really cultivate practices in our lives like movement practices and cold plunge and breath work and meditation practice specifically, that help us change our brainwave states. And so I've really created a full program that allows us to create a foundation so that, you know, we are able to show up. For me, in particular, I'm a content creator. I've been a solo entrepreneur my entire life, and so creating good quality content and creating is really like my joy in life. So how can I create a foundation so that I can show up at my computer and write in a flow state, for example? And that's just one of many examples of the way that we can leverage this, whether you're a writer or, you know, going to work, or suffering from depression and want to, you know, get unstuck. I mean, there's so many ways that this framework can be applied.
It's so beautiful, everything that you're saying. And I like don't even know where to begin. Like you said, when you were like, I have so much to touch on with what you said. It's really just so important. And I keep hearing in my head, like the integration is the real ceremony. And then moving beyond the psychedelics, just having all of these different plethora of ceremonies. Like these are ceremonies in and of themselves. A cold plunge ceremony, I do one every day here in California in the Pacific Ocean. It is freezing in this ocean right now, and it is one of the most incredible, enlivening, cleansing experiences that I've ever had, and it does shoot you into that flow state. And to be able to figure out all of these different avenues and get to those altered states of consciousness is super important, because I think that's where people get super stuck, is that when you go down the wrong path and you think that you're just supposed to be doing psychedelics and in heroic doses as well, several times a month, several a week, that's when it becomes like the dangerous part of psychedelics. And that's where it becomes difficult for us who are trying to help break the stigma around it and really educate around it and show people who it's meant for, how to use this properly, and then how to also integrate that into their regular day-to-day lifestyle without the medicine itself. And that's what you're offering, right? That everything you just said is in itself, in its own essence, medicine, right? It may not be a plant medicine, it may not be a psychedelic, but it is going to bring you into that capacity to tap into flow state, to tap the quantum field, because that's what flow state technically is. You know, it's our capacity to tap into that flow, that constant, information that I like to call it the iCloud of consciousness. You know, we're uploading and downloading from this iCloud of consciousness constantly. And I don't personally ever claim to be, quantum physics or mechanics expert myself, but I do have an understanding of tapping into that. And I know that even in a completely sober state, you have the capacity to do so, especially when you start to develop these different practices that you just mentioned. You have the capacity to do so on a daily basis, even if you were to decide, I never want to touch it in the first place, or I want to stop touching them as well. For me, I'm personally on a path of complete sobriety right now. And I know that if I feel called to sit with Aya, I'm going to go and I'm going to have a ceremony. If I feel called to a mushroom or an LSD experience again in my life, I'm not going to limit myself. But I also know that I've had so many of those experiences that I can tap into that same essence without the medicine. That's a big part of my messaging that I want to share too, because I don't want to, condemn it or demonize it, because I've decided to take a step back. And that's
time and place. It's one tool among so many. And if you see someone that's just hopping from ceremony to ceremony without any real change taking root into the actual fabric of their lives, then what is the point? It's just seeking the next high. And so I think we're just really starting to tap into what's possible with our relationship with plant medicines. And that's really where I'm taking it, in terms of exploring all the different ways we can leverage these experiences to come back to our core intention, which is cultivating the change we wish to see in our lives. And integration, it's all about integration. And so I think that that's essential. And on my website, livefreelaurad.com, for people listening, I have guides for vetting your shaman. I have guides for, so if people are listening to this and like, oh, I am feeling called to sit with ayahuasca, please read this guide. It offers over 40 questions that you can ask a potential person who's going to be holding space, shaman, guide, facilitator. And it's important to have discernment, because a lot of people are serving medicine these days with very little experience. And so there is such a full range of the double-edged sword of what's happening with the proliferation of plant medicines and psychedelics in our culture, in our Western culture right now. So just bringing that, at the forefront of understanding. And I also have guides on integration and help people and support people through plant medicine integration. So that's another aspect.
Yeah. Do you want to also tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about your personal podcast that you have going? I know it's newer and it's awesome, because you mentioned the Dennis McKenna episode, which is coming out tomorrow from the day that we filmed and recorded this, but it'll be out by the time this episode comes out. So everyone can go and reference this right after you have a listen to this. If you're feeling a little bit of a podcast binge and you want to hear more from Laura D, and you want to hear from Laura D and Dennis McKenna, both superstars in my eyes in the psychedelics world. So if you want to tell us a little bit about your podcast and where people can find that too, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much for that opportunity. Yeah, it's called the Psychedelic Leadership Podcast, and I am just starting. I have really been getting my butt kicked so hard by this learning curve of starting a podcast, and it's really brought me to my edge in a lot of ways. And the intention behind it is to um, connect with more people in the psychedelic space and really have open-minded conversations around all the different ways that we can step up and step in as leaders in the psychedelic movement, and also having conversations about how psychedelics can help forge us and shape us into better leaders and heart-centered leadership in particular. And so it's really a multidimensional conversation. I also interview people outside of the psychedelic space, like embodied leadership coaches, people in. I also interviewed Bruce Lipton, who's the author of Biology of Belief, to look at how we can be applying other modalities and other knowledge bases towards combining it with our work with psychedelics, which is again really just where I'm so fascinated by. But I don't claim to know a lot about any of these topics, in the sense that, like, I'm just showing up to these conversations with a lot of open mindedness and a lot of curiosity, and want to hold space for differing viewpoints, in terms of how people are showing up to lead in this space and beyond. And so I'm learning a lot, and yeah, and I'm just giving myself permission to fumble through it all, and just learn as I go.
Is it mostly on Instagram, or where can we find it?
Yeah, on iTunes, on Spotify. My website is sort of my home base for everything. Livefreelaurad.com is my website. And also that's my Instagram handle. So if you're on the Instagram realm, please connect with me, send me a message. I love to connect with people there.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that, we both have this podcast going. You have it more geared around the psychedelics, but also around just leadership in general. And I don't know if I've ever shared the story behind my podcast, this one that we're speaking on right now, but I was having a mushroom experience, and I had a beautiful download of 88 first and last names. And I am terrible at first and last names. Like, literally, names are the worst thing for me to remember. I'm trying to get better at it. But I was like, where is this all coming from? What does this mean? I like asked for guidance on what it meant. Divine data flew down on the piece of paper, and I was like, okay, what is it then? And I knew it was a podcast almost immediately after I got a sentence written out that said, you know, authenticity and leadership and inspiring change by embodying and speaking our highest truths. And that was it. And off I went. I started texting, messaging, Instagram messaging, all of the different ways that I was connected to these 88 people. I started to message them. And I think I had like 55 people message that first night. And it takes a lot to message 55 individuals. So I like exhausted myself 13 hours. I had almost yeses from every single person. It was during the pandemic. So some people were like so all over the place right now that like, I don't even know which way is up from down. So come back to me in like 6 months. And I've just hit the ground running with it. And I really love this opportunity to, like you said, hold space for these game changers. And I love being able to be connected to everyone in this space and creating and forging these bonds. And I think it's super important that we, like your shamans and everyone was saying to you about the ayahuasca microdosing stuff, listen to your heart, because this is an answering to that heart's and soul's calling, to bring this for yourself, for the connections that you're making, and for everybody who chooses to come in and listen. And I denote a lot of my creativity to myself first and foremost, but these plant medicines have also come in and tapped me on the shoulder and activated me and told me, this is what you're meant to be doing. It helped me bring me into that flow state. It offered me, the opportunity to recognize that I have the connections, I have the desire, of the impetus, I have the personality even to host something like this, to have these conversations. And I love seeing it popping up in a bunch of different people in this 2020 crazy year, but it is this paradigm shift, for lack of a better word. Like you said, like it is a buzzword at this point, but we are really recognizing this huge shift in consciousness that is happening on the planet, global level. it isn't just happening to the people who are in the hippy dippy, woo woo lifestyle. Everybody is experiencing an awakening on some realm or another. And I really love that we both brought these podcasts into fruition this year. And I love that we get to offer our own medicine in it as well, So I'm excited, like I said at the beginning, to continue hearing your podcast episodes come through. I'm excited to get some advice on all of that which you've learned, because I know that it is a journey. So if anyone out there is listening and says, like, I've been feeling the pull to start a podcast, go start a podcast. What you have to say and what you feel you could bring to the table is important. And I think I mentioned limiting beliefs before. And I think that we need to start recognizing that, like, the gatekeepers that really exist are within ourselves, and we're stopping ourselves from self-actualization and from bringing our truths to the table. And I just thank you so much, Lord, for offering your truth. And, leadership isn't for the faint of heart, especially in the 21st century with what we're going through in 2020. And you're doing it, you're forging a path. And like I said, you're helping other people come into their own paths and coming into their own alignment, because you've found a way to come into your own true alignment. And doing this by offering all of this, you're really making a big wave on this planet. So I thank you for that.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think there's like this like three-part model. I love thinking in terms of like models and diagrams and systems and things like that. But I'm actually going to be recording a solo episode about this. I think for anyone, there's this way that we can think about it in terms of like giving ourselves permission, to go for what we want. And then there's like another sort of aspect of that in terms of if you're going to give yourself permission to really step up and step into what you want to create, there's also a sense of responsibility that comes with that. And so I think it's easy to just swing in the other direction and be like, I have permission, I'm giving myself permission, and just like bulldoze through spaces. But I think we have to remember that there's like another balancing point of that. So if I'm going to give myself permission, which I think the core of that, the first step before we do that is really to like peel all the layers back in our lives and get right with yourself. This is aside from your marriage, your relationship, your parents, your friends, all the things that you think you should or shouldn't do, should or shouldn't say, your path. Strip all the shit in your life, all the stuff, all the things that fill up your life, and get to the core essence of who you are and get right with that. And that's the work that we do on this path. And then once you're right with that, once you're in right relationship with really the core of who you are, that essence of really why you're here, then you give yourself permission to step up and listen to that and use that internal alignment as your compass. And then once you give yourself permission, also remember that comes with responsibility. So give yourself permission and hold it with respect, with humility, with curiosity, with open-mindedness. And it's a dance, it's a balancing act, it's really, it's not static, it's very fluid, you know?
Yeah, gorgeously put. I want to wrap this up in the next couple minutes. So if there's anything, any closing statements that you want to offer for people, anything you're working on right now that you want to share, or just another, beautiful droplet of wisdom for us, please do.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. And again, my website is livefreelaurad.com. I'm creating my signature program. I've been teaching microdosing programs with groups. I generally work with entrepreneurs and visionaries, change makers, pro athletes. I've had like Hollywood actresses in my courses. And so my signature course that's coming out in February is Microdosing Mastermind. So it's really combining everything I talked about for people who are creating, for people who are really holding big visions in their lives. It's like a visionary training program, and also a mastermind for people to really come together and support each other on the journey, which is such a big part of sort of the juiciness of a program like that. And so all of that information and my podcast and Instagram, it's all on my website. So I appreciate the invitation to share that. And I think I would just love to end on one of my favorite quotes, because we talked about flow states so much, and that it's so much bigger, that we tap into something so much bigger than ourselves. And this quote from Pantajali is really at the forefront of the way that I relate to flow. And so I think it would just be nice to end on that nugget of wisdom that doesn't come from me, but from someone I respect and admire greatly.
I would love to hear it. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, he says, when you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all of your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitation. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new, great, and wonderful world. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person than you ever dreamed yourself to be. And so that's really at the forefront of the way that I engage with my understanding around flow, and seeing it as much more of a dance with inspiration, that we can learn how to pay attention to this very specific frequency, which is inspiration. And I invite people who are listening to just think about the last time that you felt inspired. That energy that comes, it's so much bigger than each of us. It's so much more. It taps us into something so much greater than our bodies on this physical realm, and that we can create a scaffolding in our lives to really channel that inspiration in a good way and to connect more to it. And that really makes life worth living for me, is this dance that I get to play with inspired creation. So thank you for letting me share that.
Wow. Yeah, that really hit me to the core. Like I had to take a couple deep breaths after you and while you were you reading that or do you have that memorized?
I have it memorized. I look at it every day.
Beautiful. Yeah, that really I was like trying to like see while I was also trying to absorb it. I was like, is she reading it? I can't even tell. I don't think she is. That's incredible.
Yeah, there's this when he says dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive. There's something so just rich in that, and we discover ourselves to be a greater person than we ever dreamed to be. And he starts by saying, when you're inspired by some great purpose, it's like this frequency of inspiration. And that's really the foundation of the morning flow practices, is like, how do we create a container of like our environment in our lives to support this open channel and allowing, I mean, just for gosh, we could keep going forever on this, but there is so much energy available to us that we just shut ourselves down to. So it's learning to open that channel and connect more with this very high frequency energy that I call inspiration, and that comes from somewhere that we could call the quantum realm. It's the source of all of creation. It's and we're inherently a part of that, and remembering that we're inherently a part of that is so crucial, and that we have this co-creative dance that we can play with it, you know.
Totally. Well, you said we could keep going with that. I would love some time to part two with you. I actually just had a moment of inspiration myself. I remember one of the first things I saw on Facebook you talk about, and I hope it's okay that I mentioned this, but your open relationship that you were working on with Noah, your husband, at one point. I would love to have a whole conversation on inspiration, a whole conversation on relationships. And I'm sure that everyone who's listening or watching would love to see and hear you on here again for a part two or even for a part three, because I know we could keep going. And I also know that you have to get going now to go and do some work on that Dennis McKenna episode, which I'm super excited to see when it comes out. I'm super excited to hear feedback from everybody who's listening here and now or in the future whenever they come on for this. So thank you so much, Laura Dawn. I hope we get to do this again. I feel like you said, we could go on and on and on. But this has been so beautiful, so magical. I so appreciate you and your wisdom and all that you're willing to and bear to the world. It's so incredible. It really is what this show is inspired from. It is that authentic leadership. You are embodying and speaking your highest truth, and you are affecting change on this planet. So thank you for doing that. And I have so much love and respect for you.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you so much for having me on this show. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure dropping in with you.
Absolutely, babe.